Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. And Darren, welcome back to the Marines Memorial Club, because I think Darren may be the most senior Marines Memorial Club member here. If you'll look at his original ID. Now, what year is that, Darren, that you had that crumpled ID card to get into this place?
I think that was in 1971 I came by here, and I didn't even know I had that until I was invited back, and I was looking through some of my drawers, and I couldn't believe that I still had it. It's still in pretty good shape, and we might,
Well, you know, it's important to note that Darren is a hometown guy, and one of the themes of tonight's show is as incredible this book is. It's even more incredible when you try to think about how a guy from Marin County, California, ends up with one of the most elite reconnaissance units in Vietnam. That is a long cultural shift and exchange that you made. But tell me, you grew up here in San Francisco originally?
Well, originally I was born here, not too far from here. It was down in the Mission, and I grew up in North Beach and went to school at a elementary school called Cerre B. Cooper.
But your real connection with the Marine Corps is you have a strong family connection with the Marine Corps.
My father was a Marine in Okinawa and spent time in Japan, and was discharged here in San Francisco, I think at Treasure Island. My uncle was a Carlson Raider who fought in the Pacific Campaign.
For those who are not familiar with the history, that was the original elite reconnaissance Raider unit of the Marine Corps in Guadalcanal.
That was Recon Today, first Recon Today, I think is going back to the name the Raiders right now as we speak.
So we got to explain the book. Didi Mao is a term Vietnamese, or there's colloquials about that, but how did Didi Mao translate to you?
Well, in the Marine Corps, it's a Vietnamese translation. It means to leave quickly or get out of here, or to move swiftly. The Marine Corps was get the F out of here now.
The Vietnamese version sounds a little better, Didi Mao.
Right.
It says here, tigers, rock apes, the jungle, and war. Not exactly a love story.
Well, it was an adventure, I have to admit. There was little love in that adventure.
But you said that you wrote, your motivation for writing the book was kind of a love relationship with the men you had, the men you served with, that you thought probably weren't recognized for all that they did.
Well, they were the unsung heroes that were responsible for coming out unconditionally. They came out unconditionally, put their lives on the line to save a recon team of 7 people, 6 Marines and maybe a Navy corpsman. Basically what happened was my wife found out that I might have some VA benefit coming to me after 40, 50 years. I told her that that's not going to happen. So she decided with a friend of mine to see if I could get some benefits. Well, I had no DD-214. I didn't even know what it was. I think I burned those papers when I came home. I didn't have anything to do with the Marine Corps or the government anymore, and I was going to go to college and get an education and start my life. But Gina, my wife, said that, come on, let's see if you got some benefits. Without me knowing, she was able to get a DD-214, plus I guess she got every mission, every record of the Marine Corps had on me, good and bad, and she was wondering what this was about, who she'd marry, because I just told her I was a Marine in Vietnam and I did a little combat.
Darren, you talk about the people you're with in recon that you have this lifelong relationship with, but you came miles away, cultures away from recon, running in Novato High School. You were a great runner. Tell me about what you were doing late 60s before going into the Marine Corps.
Well, I was a little out of control, but I think if you were lived here in San Francisco in the Bay Area, especially Marin County, we had rock bands. We had, we grew pot, smoked pot, drank a lot of beer, hung out at the beaches, did a little surfing, went to a lot of rock concerts in San Francisco. There's a place called Haight-Ashbury that we had to go, and that was an adventure, and we had to explore that. And so when I ended up in the Marine Corps, after growing up in Marin County, I thought this was the way the whole world was.
Well, like a lot of other people, you were able to escape the draft by joining the Marines. But what was the real motivation for joining the Marines other than escaping the draft?
There really wasn't a motivation. It's just that I was going to be drafted in the Army. And in college, I was a pretty good athlete. All through high school, I had run and won many races and was a champion in the state. And had gone to the Olympic trials when I was like 17 in the marathon. So I was in pretty good shape. And there was a guy named Billy Mills who won a gold medal in the Olympics in 1964. When I was 14, I saw him run in Tokyo, and he was a Marine. And that made a big impression, and that said, that if I went in the Army or another branch of service, I'd never have a chance to compete in track and field or running. And Marine Corps had some great coaches at the time. So I didn't keep my grades up in college. I was a dog and heat lit out of the backyard.
So now the hippie runner finds himself in the Marine Corps, in a completely different world, completely different tribes. Not only did you get through boot camp, but you upped the ante a little bit by going to recon. Tell me about the training and the people you were with that you started this bond with.
Well, I ended up, to be in recon, you have to volunteer and then go through recon school. And apparently, I got volunteered. It was something I didn't expect. The guys I found out later in recon school, they were tough. They were the cream of the crop in the Marines. They loved the Marine Corps. They were tough, and they were the ones that had the high scores in boot camp and PT, and they passed a lot of these extraordinary feats. And I was challenged by them. I didn't like getting beat by anybody, and there were guys in recon that were tough. And I thought that this was a good group of guys, and I started enjoying the competition of being a ranger.
Well, next stop is I Corps Vietnam, 1970, and working out at Da Nang, and that covered an area all the way up to the DMZ, which divided the two countries at the time. But it was also an area which was a main infiltration route for North Vietnamese soldiers coming into South Vietnam. So here you are, a year away from lovely Marin County and the beer, the girls, and the pot, and now you're really in the thick of things.
And I trained in Okinawa, a little bit of Guam, and then I was in Da Nang, and then we went through some training, extensive training in Da Nang, and I'm with a group of guys from the Midwest, farm boys, and some guys from the South, and they're listening to what they call country western and Motown, and I didn't understand what the heck that was, because I was listening to Jimi Hendrix and the Grateful Dead, and I go, what is this stuff? And they're looking at me as some kind of hippie commie that, dope addict that, how did I get into recon? But we did some missions together, and as you enter the jungle, you never know what is going to happen in any, I have to say, seconds. And we have to watch out for one another. We have to take care of one another. And I found these guys accepting me, and I found that they weren't so bad from the Midwest, that these guys were actually good guys. And we gelled. We came together as a team.
A lot of people know about the SEALs or whatever, but recon, your basic mission, How many of you were you? What were you doing out there? And you were saying you were really deep in the thick of it in the jungles mostly.
But the jungle, you have to imagine what the jungle, first of all, there's nothing in the Marine Corps in our training that prepared us for what the jungle was like. And if you look at the jungle, they have a way of what they call an LZ, a landing zone, where they try to find a place where they can land the helicopter, and you can set up a perimeter, and then you enter the jungle, and it's a black, dark wall that you look at. And the jungle does not like you. It's not friendly. It doesn't want you there. You're a stranger. So you penetrate the jungle, and you find that it's hot, moist, wet. It's humid. It's dark. There are all kinds of things going on in the jungle. You're trying to break brush. You don't have a machete. You're using what they call a K-bar, which I'm up by my shoulder up there, to cut the vines that are wrapping around your neck. And these vines are got like hooks on them, like fish hooks that are grabbing around your neck, and you're getting tangled up. They're called wait a minute vines because the guys are getting away from you, and you can't say anything, but you're going, wait a minute, you know.
But the main thing was you were back, usually behind enemy lines, way far away from the secure lines where most of the troops were, and you were operating on missions that you weren't supposed to get in contact with the enemy. You were just supposed to find where they were generally.
Well, you had missions, and it depended on your briefing what your mission might be. It could be a number of things, but first you have to learn your terrain and the territory, which for me was mostly the jungle. Now, our missions were numerous missions to just gather intelligent data, to observe the enemy, and see how they're getting their supplies or where they're headed. If it's a new platoon or battalion back in the jungles, you could tell by their uniform, clean uniform, boots are polished, or if they're a tired group of guys, and we'd report back to intelligence. But my team mostly was doing, our missions were to go behind enemy lines and try to kidnap a high-ranking officer, and they would usually want us to get one or two if we could. Most of those missions were failures. We did complete a few.
But you were not supposed to engage the enemy. You were terribly outnumbered. There wasn't much of a chance for you to win a fight with a larger element with what you had, so you were really observing. But as you talk about the jungle, you have a passage here in the book. You said the jungle is almost enemy number one because it was so forbidden.
Well, that's what I was trying to portray. Is it was exhausting, and you're fighting the jungle. It was actually easier fighting the enemy than it was fighting the jungle because, like I said, the terrain and the heat and the vegetation just corrupted all your energy from you. Where the enemy you'd actually make contact with on occasion by mistake, and there'd be an adrenaline rush.
I remember the thing that struck me in the book, and if you want to read it here, about how miserable it was. I mean, just physically miserable it was. Here, I have it right here if you want.
Let me get my glasses on here. I've got it right. I got it right here.
I mean, when you read the book, it's not so much about tactics or what they were trying to do out there. It was really about human survival, mentally, physically, and then there was the enemy. And they were dealing with so many things before they even came in contact with the enemy. But there's one passage really struck me about how miserable it was out there.
You can read it if you want.
No, you go.
Okay. Well, first of all, I wrote down here, the jungle pretty much just ate you alive. And the jungle, we weren't welcomed in the jungle. And so I wrote down, it was the pervasive dampness brought its own set of gifts, including dreaded jungle rot, an infection that oozed pus from our lower extremities, and that we'd wipe on our utilities. The degradation plunged to a low point when old and new rot pus mixed with a concoction of leech blood, monsoon dampened mud, grease from shitty K rations, and whatever slimy crap we'd absorbed was beyond disgusting. Then there was the immersion foot, the constant assault on the membranes of the feet, and the continuous pounding in soaked boots numbed our lower appendages and produced blisters and sores, and in the worst case, gangrene. Immersion foot was a slowly developing affliction that snuck up until one day after removing your boots to ease the pain. The grotesque damage was understandable. If you ignored your foot conditions long enough, the foot rot and decaying blood from leeches would congeal and adhere in the clumps of your feet.
So, I mean, this is before you even meet the enemy. The misery quotient is quite high. And you have to still function despite you having been physically worn down to that point.
It was, like I said, it was really enduring. It took, like, these guys were in such great condition, not too many people, I don't even think Navy SEALs would be able to handle what we went through sometimes. So it was the training that these guys had was the on-job training from missions, on top of missions in the jungle, that they were able to cope with what they had. But you know, in the long run, like I said, when we decided to leave the jungle and get onto a trail, that was a mistake, because now we were actually putting ourselves in more harm's way. You know.
Well, we have two young men in the audience here who can relate to what you were talking about, and they're pictured there. Now, you may not recognize them from 55 years ago, but Mike Fallon and Jerry Spolter were in that same reconnaissance unit and worked with Darren on occasion and experienced many of the things that he experienced.
And I happened to be a point man for a recon team that Colonel Fallon was my commanding officer. But those missions, they were really professional, and I was proud to be part of Delta Company. But they also had something that I'd never experienced before. They were in charge of a hill, Hill 119.
But the nature of your game was really hunting the enemy, seeking them out, not necessarily engaging them, but it was close quarters on every level. And your motto, swift, silent, and deadly.
Yeah.
And the ace of spades.
The ace of spades was our emblem, and I think we were the only group in the military that was able to have the crossbone and skulls and the ace of spades. Recon had many missions, but most of the missions weren't to make contact, and it was mostly to gather intelligent data. But on the contrary, Mike, there were patrols and there were teams out there that their job was to engage with the enemy using the element of surprise and do a lot of damage. And just like the Raider teams in World War II, their job was to go in there with a small force and penetrate the enemy's lines and to think that they were a lot larger than they were. So, you know, there was occasion that happened.
But combat for you was very up close and personal.
For me, combat was a mistake, and I did not. That's one thing I liked about recon was I didn't think I was going to be in any combat. I wasn't what they call a grunt. Now, recon looks at Marine infantrymen called grunts.
And if you were compromised, if you were discovered, Diddy Mao came into play. You had to start beating feet. You had to get on the move. So tell me, what's it feel like when you know you're totally surrounded? You're no longer silent. You're totally surrounded, and you've got to make a move.
So what happens is when you run into the enemy, It's in the jungles, so you're not sure how big a force that the enemy patrol that you ran into. Point to point would be, I would run into their point man. We'd make contact, eye contact. We knew one of us was going to die that day. Within seconds, you cannot hesitate. And if he looked at me, he was dead. If he didn't react, he was dead, because I was already shooting, aiming at him and hoping that I get out of there alive. Now, within those split seconds, I could tell you what that guy looked like. I could tell you the uniform and the belt buckle he was wearing and what kind of weapon he had. And I could tell you how tall he was, what color eyes he had, if he had shaved or not, you know, what emblems he had on his uniforms. And I never, ever forgot what those guys looked like. So what the point is, that guy over there, I really don't know him, and I'm not sure who he is sometimes, but as a point man, I think he did a pretty good job. He came back alive, and he had a good team, the support that he needed. So when I shot a few rounds off, and if you notice, I'm not using an M16 there, guys. That never worked for me as a point man, because it would jam up during a firefight. So I walked point, what they call an M79 grenade launcher with a shotgun round. It had one round, but I didn't have to aim it, and I just pointed in the direction of the other point man, the enemy point man.
So what was the tactic when you found that you were totally surrounded? There's no way that you could probably fight your way out of that situation.
Well, usually we weren't surrounded, but we were being chased. And once I got a round off, and I would say DD, which meant we're in trouble, we got to get the heck out of here, they would set up a perimeter, the team, with the riflemen, and I would be able to take a rifle and put what they call a white phosphorus, they call it Willie Pete, grenade in that, it's called a blooper, and make a smoke screen so that we could run and get away from the enemy. We ran fast through the jungle. Now, as bad as the jungle was and as tough as it was amazing when you're being chased by the NVA, how fast and easy you can get through the jungle. We did get surrounded on occasion, and that's when you guys came and bailed us out.
So that's when you called 911.
We call help.
Okay.
We need some assistance here, guys.
Well, 911 in our case, in Jerry Spolter's case here, was VMO2, based back in Da Nang, that we were supposed to be in support of the recon teams out there. And there is Jerry Spolter, who is also known as Cowpoke 10.
And you were Cowpoke what?
I was Cowpoke 7.
Cowpoke 7. Okay.
And we would get the call, and I think Jerry will attest us, we used to wear a little necklace around our necks that had the position reports of the recon teams who were out that night, that day. So as we scrambled to the aircraft, they'd say Little Abner, Nailbrush, Cayenne. That's all they told us, and we were going to have to try to go out and find them. So you were talking to us.
Well, we had two radio men. There's, like I said, 6, 7 guys on the team. He had a primary radio and a secondary radio. So my job was done, and it's up to the radio men to make contact, to dial, get 911, get us out of here. And so they're in contact with you guys or whoever they could get in contact with, and you would say, pop a smoke.
So we'd be looking for the smoke that he would pop, and we were taught by my instructor, Tim Moriarty, who's here tonight, taught us how to look out for it. And from that point on, it was all about trying to help you guys, whether it was to bring in airstrikes, bring in artillery, start calling in medevacs, start bringing in the helicopters to try to get you out of there.
Well, how that, I'm not, like I said, my job was done. I was sitting in a bomb crater usually, and that's when we got surrounded. Bomb crater out in the rice paddies outside the jungle. We made it to the jungle, and now we're surrounded. And I would see this Bronco. I'd hear it coming in, and all you would see is this plane slow. It's going slow, and it's coming down low, and all you hear is this, like, and all these look like raindrops coming out. And I guess that was your, you had a little, like machine gun.
While that was going on, we were listening for them, and their situation was so dire, in most cases, they couldn't even talk to us. They could acknowledge they could hear us by clicking their handset. The enemy was that close, and even in the middle of a firefight, they didn't want to disclose their position by speaking.
We couldn't because, there are times where we were off a trail and there'd be a platoon of the NVA not even more than 10 feet from us, and we're hiding, behind a banana tree or some bamboo. And it would, I'd hear the radio man say, "What do you want me to do? Just hand, the receiver over to the enemy and let them talk to you?" That's how close we were. And when they came in with their guns blazing, it was really hard for them not to hit us sometimes.
And that pregnant pause was probably the most terrifying experience of my life. After we rolled out, did we hit our own guys? And usually you guys would start running after the explosions, and it may be 30 seconds, maybe even a minute, before they'd come back up and say, do it again, keep it coming. But there was a minute, at least, where we thought we might have hit them.
It was hairy, I have to admit. And then you guys, they would make a couple of flight paths to have the enemy concentrate on them more than us, and they would call in a Cobra. I think you guys called in the Cobras, and they would come in with rockets. Now we're looking at some, a shooting match with the OV-10 Broncos and the Cobras coming in with the rockets, and we're just sitting down in a muddy bomb crater watching all this happen.
Well, you owe us something here. Because of our planes coming in to help you guys, we used to take a fair amount of holes. And in fact, I think, Jerry, you said you had 600 holes in your plane by the time you finished your missions. So it...
yeah, I mean, you were shot...
but you guys fared much worse. When their teams would come back, you should have seen the condition they were in when they got back to the recon base. And it was always a great time. We would try to do a debrief, go back over there, have some cold beers with them, and we'd all kind of rehash what just went down.
Right.
And it was quite an amazing drama working with you guys.
Well, not only, you guys are basically saving our lives, and the Cobras are coming in with their attack rockets. We had with the Chinook, not the Chinook, what they call it, Seahawks or Sea Knights. Yeah, had the Sea Knights come in, and they had a machine gunner on two sides. I think they were M50s, and they usually had an M60 on the rear. And their job was to extract us with the ladder, and they'd roll this ladder out, and we'd have to climb up on it while they're taking rounds. And there again, unsung heroes. You have these pilots, co-pilots, crew chiefs, these gunners, keeping that chopper stable, taking hits like crazy. I'm climbing up this ladder, extraction ladder, with what they call a Swiss saddle. It's a repelling type saddle with these D-rings that you hook up onto the ladder, and they're going to take off with you hanging on the ladder. I'm looking at the chopper, and it's starting to look like Swiss cheese. And that chopper pilot is keeping that helicopter stable so that we can lock on. And I'm going, if he stays any longer, he's going to be shot down. And then occasionally it did happen.
Darren, after 8 months of all this, what was going through your mind? And had you changed your mind about, was this a very good idea, this situation you had volunteered for?
Well, in the book, I write a chapter, and I was young. I was now I was 20 years old. Actually, I was getting to be an old man now. I wasn't a teenager anymore. And so I was getting tired of being a point man, and I was good at my job, but I didn't know how many more missions I had in me. And some of my guys were getting hit, and we lost a couple of guys. And I was wondering if we were going to win this war. Now, I went over there thinking that the Marines and the guys I was working with, we could win this war. And later on in my tour of duty, we started having rules and regulations and mandates called rules of engagement. And that didn't make sense to me as a Marine. And it didn't seem like we were making ground. And this war has been going on for a long, long time. And was it necessary? And so I started losing my morale a little bit and wondering if I'm going to make it out alive.
The Animals' famous song, "We Got to Get Out of This Place." You started thinking about an exit strategy.
I had, I was given a little exit strategy motivation because in Da Nang they had, because the morale was it was becoming bad, mostly with not the Marine Corps, but with the other branches of service, morale was getting really, really bad, is what I understand. And they had these games. It was like an Olympic Games that they wanted to have all the branches of the military to compete, and everybody wanted to win these games, which would, they had soccer, and then they had track and field and some other events. And so somebody in the Marine Corps, his name was Lieutenant Doherty, thought he had a ringer in me because I was one of the fastest runners the Marine Corps had, and he pulled me out of the jungle to go run a race. And there was a time trial, and there was like 60 runners at this event, and I was running against Koreans and Vietnamese, and I was running against the Army, Navy, Aussies, and it was really interesting. But out of the 60, only 25 could go on to the finals.
So, typical Marine Corps, for a little R&R, you get in a 5,000-meter running race after he's been in the jungle. That's kind of recreation for the Marines. But you were really kind of running for your life here because you made a deal with Lieutenant Doherty. What was the deal?
And he goes, well, you get a medal. I go, well, that's great. I get a medal, I go, and then I get to go back out in the jungle. So I told him I hadn't had R&R yet. And he goes, what are you proposing? I said, well, there's these guys who go to Hawaii. He goes, yeah, but those guys are officers, ranking officers who are married, and they're restricted to a base in Hawaii. I said, well, I don't want to go to Hawaii. He goes, you're not going to make it to Hawaii. I said, what if I medal? He goes, you won't medal. You took the last qualifying place. How can you medal? And I said, if I did, he goes, well, if you did with a handshake, he goes, I'll ignore it if you could figure out a way to do it. Well, I had some money.
Well, first of all, you did medal. You finished third. So
I took second.
Second.
Yeah.
So you satisfied that requirement.
Right.
Okay. Now you've got to figure out how, not being an officer, to get for R&R to Hawaii, which was restricted to only officers or married personnel. And so you had to impersonate an officer?
Well, I had some people that I paid off in headquarters there, Camp Reasoner, who were actually, this might be new to some of the officers here, but there are guys who actually smoke pot, and I knew where to get it. And there was a place. So I got the money, paid him off. And I had. I had papers, written up that I was an officer. And I got on the plane to Hawaii. I ended up going to Guam and caught a plane to Hawaii. And there was a carry-all waiting for all the officers in Hawaii to go to this base camp.
So what could possibly go wrong? You've gotten yourself out of Vietnam. You've gotten yourself to Hawaii. You're getting a reprieve from your almost daily activities as a reconnaissance Marine. So you're in Hawaii.
I'm in Hawaii, and it's paradise, but there's no leeches or snakes or monkeys or anything like that. But San Francisco's not that far from Hawaii.
So you get on a plane, you fly back to Marin County, which is technically AWOL. You're not supposed to be coming back to the United States. Well, you weren't supposed to be in Hawaii, and then you're certainly not supposed to be back in the United States. So you come home.
I come home. At that time, you didn't need much to catch a plane. You just pay for a ticket and you catch a flight. It's not like today where you had a line and you had to have all this ID and stuff like that. And I made it to San Francisco, yes.
And you go back up to Druid Heights in Marin County and your old hangouts?
Druid Heights was a hippie or bohemian kind of commune, and that's where all the rock stars and poets and writers would hang out, and they drank and smoked pot and did other drugs too. But I was back home for a little more than a week.
So your family started to intervene in a very interesting way. What was your mother's recommendation?
Well, she was like, how did I get home, for one thing, and I'm not going back. She didn't want me to go back she had some relatives up in Vancouver, Canada, and so I talked to my father, and he wasn't so against it now, though he was very patriotic and a World War II vet. The Vietnam War was starting to sour for him, and so he agreed to let me go to Canada, and I was on my way to Canada. Now I would have been a traitor.
So what made you change your mind?
Well, there was a guy named Walter Cronkite. Some of you remember him. You're giving up, you're showing your age. And I was just happened to catch it. He had a portion about the news in the war, what was happening in the war in Vietnam, and he had the body counts and who was winning the war, and showing clips of the jungle and the soldiers, and they were interviewing these guys in the jungle, and right there, I just realized that if one of my guys got killed when I wasn't on a mission with them, and they substituted a point man that didn't know what he was doing and walked them in an ambush or a booby trap, punji pit, could I live with that for the rest of my life? Because I loved those guys, and I couldn't stand the fact that they might be in jeopardy without the team being together. It's not just one guy, it's all of us working together, and you put somebody in that team that's not familiar with how we worked, and they get injured, how would you feel?
There you are on the right. You go back. You got 5 more months of this to do. And, I think a lot of guys who went over there, you go over there once, and you're a little naive, and you get through it. You went back the second time.
I went back. And now my purpose, I had a purpose, and it was for us all to come home alive.
So now you're back to enemy number 1, that jungle, that you're back in there.
There's the jungle. And you see that grass? That grass will cut right through your uniform like a sharp knife. That's what they call razor grass up there.
And so you served out the rest of your tour. No one knew that you went back to the United States, so it wasn't on your record or any of that matter.
No.
And
my record shows I never had an R&R.
And then you served out your 5 months, but after you got home, you showed me a letter where most of those guys on that team had been wounded.
Actually, I have a confession. I never told anybody that I actually had my own team in Echo Company, and I had maybe 6 or 7 missions with that team, and it was a great team. And when I came home, I wrote the team. I got home before they did. They still had some months left in Vietnam, and I was home, and I couldn't. I was really upset that I was home safe, and I was living in Marin County in San Francisco, and now I'm drinking beer and going to rock concerts and dating women, and they're still in the jungles fighting. And the reports were that they were, they didn't lose anybody, but they lost, they got wounded. They lost fingers and limbs from, firefights that they were in.
You mentioned in the book how difficult it was to relate to many people when you came back, especially people who were not in service, who didn't go to Vietnam. And like many Vietnam veterans, you pretty much kept your past to yourself.
I went back to school, and believe it or not, I kept my grades up. I actually lived in the library, smoking dope and drinking beer, and studying and making the dean's list, and tried to make the track team again and date some women. And I was successful dating girls in college, but I was a little bit older, and they wondered where I'd been. How come I'm older than everybody else? And I'd say I was in Vietnam. Well, you were, what were you doing in Vietnam? I was a Marine. Oh, but you didn't go kill people, did you? And I go, yeah, I kind of did. And at that time, soldiers coming back to San Francisco, and this is the way I thought it was throughout the country, soldiers that were flying in San Francisco were being spit on at the airport when they wear their uniforms. Also, the hippies were talking about how we raped the women and killed the babies and burned villages. Now, that might have happened, but I never seen it happen in the Marine Corps. Matter of fact, I saw my guys in the Marines I was with going to the villages and going to the areas to help the villagers and the orphanages.
You said you really felt like quite a loner, that you really couldn't identify with many people. You got back with your running group. That was a big help. And within the running community, you found one person who really was someone you could speak to very privately and openly, whereas there weren't many others that you could.
This individual, I'd go at the college, I'd sit on the mountain and listen to the rock concerts or listen to the protesters out there talking, and nobody would sit with me because I was a crazy Vietnam vet. But this one individual who would go up on Mount Tam with me, go jogging and running, he was quite an Evan. Yeah.
Robin Williams.
So Robin would sit with me, and he was interested in what we did over there in Vietnam, and he was never ashamed to be with me. And Robin and I became good friends. You're right.
And I think you were roommates at one point, weren't you?
Well, I had a house with 2 other runners, and he would hang out there. He was like a roomie, yeah.
And a lot of people didn't realize he was a great runner.
He was a good athlete. There's stories about him and nobody's ever heard of them, and they don't realize how good of an athlete he really was. But he also smoked dope and drank beer with us too. So.
You also mentioned someone that you really related to. You gave her credit for helping you get this book going, but your wife, Gina, was the first one to really pick up on. There was a lot of baggage that you brought back from Vietnam.
Well, there was times where she'd have to wake me up because I was being chased, and she goes, "You're doing it again, Darren. Wake up," And it was pretty much obvious that I was having nightmares. And she would say, "It's okay. You're all right. You're safe."
And so did she kind of get you through that whole process and kind of get your life back in order?
She's trying. She's, yeah.
Gina, stand up. We're a work in progress.
Thank you, yes, sir. Thank you.
And typical recon Marine, Darren hasn't stopped running. 70 plus, and now you have a whole group of 70 plus runners that you run with.
So what's happened is I was told I couldn't put a team of 70-year-olds together, and if I did, that they wouldn't be able to be competitive. And I put 12 people together, and we've been running races all over the country. One particular race called Hood to Coast. It's a 200-mile relay from Mount Hood through Portland to the ocean. And it's a kind of a runner's bucket list. It's like the Boston Marathon. And they won't give us a category because we're too old, we're going to stroke out or have heart attacks. And so I put a team together and we entered the 60-year-old category. And with help of, these women on the team, Jenny Rice, who's a world record holder in the marathon for her age group. I have a Boston Marathon winner on the team. I've got 2 other world record holders on the team. They came together and we have a team that's very competitive. And after 3 years, with the help of Tim Amix over here who's filming, he's been part of the team also, filming it. We have won the 60-year-old category at 70-year-olds, and so now Hood to Coast doesn't know what to do with us, and we've become an institution for the running community up in Portland, Oregon.
Well, Darren, on behalf of, I think, a lot of people in this room whose wives have said, well, why don't you write a book? Well, with the help of Gina, you did.
Right.
Didi Mao. Tigers, rock apes, the jungle, and war. Thank you, Darren, for being here.
Thank you.